this issue of the show, I look at DRM-less music for your smartphone, a review of the Treo 650. Thomas Boyes takes a look at the iTech Laser Virtual Keyboard for any PDA or smartphone, and I review the Nokia N70 in depth. The best smartphone ever? We'll see.
Hello. Music on your smartphone. It's fairly easy, it should be free, and you won't need to go out and buy an iPod. I should note that I'm going to advise you to avoid anything with DRM, digital rights management, not because I think you're a pirate, and neither am I, but because you and I don't want to be inconvenienced further down the line. Your masters are still probably your CDs, and I'll bet that even if you've downloaded the odd album online, you've also burnt these to CD anyway. A CD is read-only, DRM-free, robust and perfect for archiving the music you've bought. If you get taken in by the hype in the music and mobile worlds, you'd think you had to buy all your albums again, getting them in digital format, yes, but often locked to a single device, which is no good at all. I'm not advocating piracy, but I do believe that once I've bought a music album in one format, I should be allowed to listen to it on any device that I own, hence the use of old-fashioned CDs that we all typically have dozens of already. But day to day it's a real pain having to keep swapping CDs, not to mention the pain of the physical format and the bulk, the risk of damage, and most of all your desire to play the content on your one device that you carry everywhere with you, your smartphone. So it makes a lot of sense to have all your music on your desktop PC or Mac in a format that's compatible with your smartphone. Now, you've heard a lot about MP3 in the past, and this is still an acceptable format, but it's quite inefficient. Given that we're talking about memory cards on a smartphone, being able to fit twice as many songs on is a real advantage. Now, Windows mobile smartphones can play both MP3 and WMA, Windows Media Audio, a superior format which offers CD quality at only 64 kbps, kilobits per second. You have to get used to some of this jargon. Kilobits per second is a term used in video and audio in the computer world. It's a measure of how much information is stored per second. 64 kbps is half that required by MP3, meaning that you can fit almost 4 hours of music into each 100 megabyte on your memory card. So if you've got a Windows mobile device, it'll pay you to use Windows Media Player to rip your CDs to WMA files and folders. Do remember to go into Options, go to the RIP Music tab, and uncheck the copy protection box. And now you should find it easy to create a pool of digital content on your hard disk and using Media Player to copy your folders and playlists directly over to your smartphone. Symbian OS based smartphones aren't yet integrated into Windows Media Player, so I recommend a DIY approach. Although again, MP3 is a reasonable choice of format, and you'll see that the built-in music software plays this fine, you'll get the best performance out of your smartphone by using the freeware OggPlay, which plays music encoded in the open source Ogg Vorbis format, or the shareware WMA+, which plays as it sounds Windows Media Audio files, but on your Symbian smartphone. In either case, you'll get maximum efficiency, and in either case, you typically take your smartphone's memory card and put it into your desktop's USB card reader, and to copy on the required music folders, typically one folder per album, on manually, then stick the card back in your smartphone in your own business. Choosing WMA Plus may be a good choice if you already have lots of music encoded in WA format. After all, ripping CDs is a time-consuming business, and you really don't want to have to do it twice. If you're starting from scratch, then Ogg Vorbis makes sense in that the ripper, either CDEX or DB Power Amp, for example, and the player itself are all completely free. And you'll also know that your music is taking up the least possible space on both desktop and smartphone. So to summarise, there's no reason why you can't enjoy your existing music collection digitally on both your desktop and your smartphone, with no worries whatsoever as to DRM. The music industry created the CD in the first place. They really can't complain that you're using their CDs as your masters and not their pay-again online DRM versions. I hope you get it sorted, and happy listening. Here's my hands-on review of the Treo 650, available in most countries now. A moment's discussion about the operating system it's based on is in order, because rather interestingly, Palm OS itself is now under new ownership by a company in Japan, and its future is rather uncertain. This runs Palm OS 5, the same as a lot of recent Palm PDAs like the Tungsten X and Tungsten Life Drive. But there's also Palm OS 6, otherwise codenamed Cobalt, which we've yet to see in the wild. And Palm Source themselves, the people who make the software, are now investigating a Linux kernel and rewriting everything. So quite where this leaves the future of Palm, I don't know, other than the recently announced 700W, their alliance with Microsoft. The 700W should be arriving in countries across the world through this year, and we'll do a review of that when it arrives. So as I say, this runs Palm OS 5 and very quickly too. Although it's not multitasking, it only takes a fraction of a second to get into each program. Here I'm going to calendar and messaging and even Real Player. Everything starts almost instantaneously, even though it's starting from scratch every single time and saving its state every single time. Most of us have played with Palm PDAs in the last 10 years, and this really is very easy to get to grips with. Everything seems familiar, everything's in the right place, and everything's nice and quick. Looking around the form factor and the hardware, the keyboard's nice, the keys are a reasonable size, they're beautifully backlit, perhaps a tiny bit convex, and it's a bit easy for your fingers to slip off occasionally, but you really can't complain. When typing with two thumbs, it's pretty fast. The screen is high resolution now, that's 320 by 320 pixels, and this is great for things like photos. This is the new media browser in Palm OS 5 with the Treo 650, and just showing off the high resolution screen. And in fact, movies are also pretty okay, although down at the low 176 by 144 resolutions that we're used to seeing on other smartphones. Looking around the hardware, there are perhaps a few too many buttons on the front, but you do get used to it, and the navigator feels good in all directions. The stub aerial on the top really shouldn't be necessary. No other cell phone I know, certainly in Europe, has got one, and the commonly held belief is that American designers generally have them because the American public won't believe that it's not a phone unless it's got a little bit of an aerial sticking out on the top. So I really think they should ditch that and step into the 21st century. On the side there's the usual jog dial, or rocker in this case, and a back button. And on the bottom, Palm's new, yet again new, multi-way connector and a headset socket for listening to stereo music. On the top is an infrared port and the mute button, which has worked so well on previous Treos. One final point about the hardware is the camera, which remains at VGA 640 by 480 pixels, and in this day and age that really isn't enough. You're going to get very frustrated with the photos you take. I know people say that smartphone cameras are just for fun use, but these days I expect to be able to take photos that I can at least print or enjoy at home and not be disappointed every time I look at them. In summary then, the Treo 650 is really well thought out. Everything's in the right place, key presses do what you want them to do, and you can do almost everything one-handed. If I had any complaints, it would be that the menus and some of the applications now are getting rather complicated and rather involved, and I really would like to see a bit of rationalisation, making these things more accessible to new users and to people in a hurry. And that's the Treo 650. We'll be looking at the 700W in a couple of programs' time.
And now over to guest reviewer Thomas Boys.
Every so often there comes along a piece of technology that's really impressive and redefines a genre, like the original Palm Pilot or the iMac G5 for example. Sometimes the best ideas are a reinvention of an existing idea, and this is where the virtual keyboard from iTech comes in. The device itself is, well, it's not really much to look at. It's quite compact. If we compare it with an Orange C500, it's about the same sort of size, maybe marginally thicker. On the top of the unit you have an indicator LED describing what the device status is, battery life, Bluetooth connection and so on. On the side of the device you have the main on and off switch, and on the base you have an automatic fail-safe, so that when the device is sitting on a surface, the device can power on. As soon as you lift it off to go and do some work somewhere else, or if you get a phone call or something like that, it powers off automatically. So it just saves a bit of time if you're in a rush. When the device powers up, you can see the keyboard clearly presented in front of you. Each letter is well spaced out and well defined, so that each tap of the keyboard produces one letter only, so you won't get groups of letters all coming up at once. When you press the letter, it produces a quiet beeping sound. Now this is quite important so that you can get some kind of feedback from the keyboard that each keystroke has actually registered. So how well does it actually type? The detection rate on the keyboard isn't fast enough for, say, a touch typist. It has difficulty registering multiple letters all at once due to the speed of the connection between the keyboard and the phone itself. However, on the other hand, you won't have to go pause, pause, pause. It's a fairly fast rate, so it's quite suitable for two-handed typing on the go. It can register double presses quite often, which can be annoying to begin with, but it's worth remembering that with the software on the phone, it is configurable to detect keystrokes at different rates, so that hopefully you won't get double presses coming up too often. My main gripes with the keyboard are, first of all, its price. I mean, at about £150 off of eBay, it's quite an expensive device, and there are cheaper Bluetooth keyboards available. The second complaint with the keyboard is down to the connection between the phone and the device itself. It took me about 15 or 20 minutes to get a connection going between the two devices, and after switching the keyboard off, after lifting it off a surface and putting it back on and switching it on again, the keyboard does take a good 5 or 10 minutes to re-establish that connection again.
One of the characteristics of Windows mobile smartphones has always been rather poor battery life. They're getting better, and of course there's a lot of functionality on offer, especially in terms of wireless connectivity, but even so it does pay to know how to reduce the battery consumption and prolong your battery life, especially when you're out on a long trip. Let's start with the basics. Most Windows mobile devices have a shortcut, either a button on the hardware or an icon on screen, depending on which network provider sets you up, to the Windows Mobile Connectivity Manager or Wireless Manager. And this is a good shortcut to turn, for example, the phone functionality on or off, should you not want to be disturbed, and save a lot of power that way. Turning Bluetooth on or off, let's turn that off now. That's Bluetooth gone. And let's turn Wi-Fi off. Assuming you're not planning to connect to any other PDAs or smartphones in the next few minutes, and not planning on surfing via Wi-Fi, why have the wireless radios on, transmitting and receiving and using a huge amount of battery power all the time? Why indeed? The next thing to look at is the screen itself. On the T-Mobile MDA Pro, here we've got a VGA screen, a large screen drawing a lot of juice. If you go into Start, and then Settings, and then System, and then tap on Backlight. For a start, you can see that you can set the backlight turning off after a specified number of seconds if you haven't used the device. If it's been sitting on your desk after you've looked something up, change this to as short a time as possible. If you want the device back, you just tap the screen and on it comes. Secondly, go into Brightness and adjust the top slider. I think you'll find that it is quite usable on a lower battery brightness level. Here's a minimum setting, and here's the maximum. In most lighting conditions, somewhere around here is fine, and it does give you dramatically longer battery life. Finally, you can turn infrared on or off. If we go back to connections and then tap on beam, if that's ticked, receive all incoming beams, then the infrared port is on all the time, and you might not want that. Uncheck it, unless you're planning to beam someone in the next few minutes. Finally, of course, don't forget that because this is a smartphone, all your data is in a flash memory, which means it can't be lost should the battery die. It also means that you can turn the device off and replace the battery with a spare. This is usually very easy on most modern smartphones. You just pop in your spare battery, which you've fully charged elsewhere, and you've then got another 5 or 6 hours of productive on time. And you shouldn't lose any data. Whichever smartphone you own, from an old Windows mobile device like this E200 to a Nokia Series 60 smartphone, it's very important to manage your profiles. These are quick ways of setting up silent mode or flight mode, depending on whether you want to be quiet or not emit any radio waves if you're perhaps entering a hospital or going on an aircraft. Now, the key to setting profiles on almost all smartphones is exactly the same, regardless of platform. A short tap on the power button brings up a list of all the profiles. Here we see, apart from power off, there's flight mode on aircraft or in hospitals. There's a shortcut to device lock in this case. Most importantly, down here we have silent, meeting and outdoor. And depending on how you've got the volume level set for each of these profiles, you can select any of them with a simple key press. So here we are with the Nokia N70, billed by some websites as the best smartphone ever made. I don't think it's quite that, but it is well constructed and feels solid enough, apart from the camera slide on the back, which is rather plasticky. The camera is a 2 megapixel of really high quality. I was very impressed and found it hard to distinguish the photos taken by this from the Nokia N90, the so-called transformer smartphone from Nokia that flips and twists, and we'll look at that later on. There's an LED flash which works well as well in close quarters. Video recording from the N70 was supposed to be rather good. I had tested it before. Here's a clip I took outdoors earlier. That was outdoors taken with the N70. This is indoors. So you can see it's near VHS quality, which isn't that good in this day and age, I guess. And at 15 frames a second and with rather poor performance indoors, you certainly wouldn't want to be shooting something like the smartphone show on the N70. I have to admit I did consider this at one point, but the quality just isn't up to it. I also found there was a bit of a buzz on my recorded movies. In terms of hardware design, Nokia have slimmed the keypad down compared to smartphones from a year or so ago. This is the Nokia 6630, which I've been brandishing about a bit in the smartphone show, and you can see that although the numeric keys are roughly the same size, the overall layout is much more luxurious on the 6630, especially for people with larger fingers. Having said that, there are some advantages to the N70. In terms of extra keys, there's this new multimedia key on the right hand side, which by default boots up gallery, but you can program it to do whatever you want. And on the right hand side there's an extra shutter button for use when you're taking portrait snaps. In terms of software, it's fairly standard Series 60 fare. The gallery is the new multimedia gallery, on which you can browse around in a circular fashion all your images and videos, and this works quite well. Quick Office is bundled, Quick Word, Quick Sheet and so on, and this works particularly well on Series 60, especially with a Bluetooth wireless keyboard. Also in the N70 software suite, as you may have spotted on the screenshots, is radio. This is visual radio, Nokia's FM radio with enhancements from the internet. And with your GPRS all plugged into your network provider, you can get information about the songs that are playing, the station details and so on, but this only works in certain areas at the moment. Also, I found that the N70's radio wasn't terribly sensitive, and I could only pick up a couple of stations in my area, which was rather disappointing. I did find on the whole that the software wasn't quite finished on the N70. I was a bit disappointed. As an example of this, if you go into Tools, you'll see there's a separate utility simply to set the function of the media key. There's one dialog, one setting. Why on earth wasn't this put in the main settings? And this field does prevail in several places where you think they could have optimized this or changed that. Under imaging, there's a movie director, which is nothing more than a gimmick. I've tried it. It takes ages and ages, that's minutes and minutes, to edit the simplest 1 or 2 minute videos, and in my opinion this application is completely pointless. Also worth noting is that under the skin, of course, is Symbian OS, famed for its multitasking ability, and Nokia seem to embrace this fairly well. If you press and hold the applications button, as on all Series 60 smartphones, you can scroll through a list of all the programs that are currently running in memory and switch to them instantaneously. No waiting for them to start up, no waiting for things to close down and so on. The multitasking works really well. If you click on an application icon, that's something that's already running, again it just switches straight to the running instance. And the Nokia N70 shines in particular because it's got 32 megabytes of free RAM. That's free memory for running programs, far more than any previous Series 60 smartphone, and this alone makes it really suitable for power users. Going back to the hardware again, there are a few more points to note. There's a camera on the front, obviously, for doing 3G video calling. On the right hand side, the memory card is DVR-S MMC, otherwise known as MMC Mobile, although the most recent Nokia smartphones seem to be standardising on mini SD, so that's a bit of a shame, but at least MMC Mobile is fairly common and fairly cheap these days. The charging socket on the bottom is Nokia's new slimline version, which is a bit of a hassle because you have to carry around this adapter with you if you want to use other people's Nokia chargers. One of the nice things about Nokias is wherever you go in the world, there's someone with a Nokia phone and you simply plug in. Now you'll have to carry an adapter around with you. The serial port's pop port has it with all recent Nokia smartphones, which is great because all the accessories fit. And there is vibrate. Unlike on the N90 with a similar high-spec camera, there's proper vibrate here, so you won't miss that important call. One final caveat about the hardware is that in the manual it says, and I quote, and you're not going to believe this, it says, a small number of missing, discoloured or bright dots may appear on the screen. This is a characteristic of this type of display. Some displays may contain pixels or dots that remain on or off. This is normal, not a fault. I'm sorry Nokia, but since when have faulty pixels in an LCD display of this size been a feature and not a fault? Having said that, the review unit didn't have any bad pixels, but being able to have something like that in the manual is rather worrying. Overall, though, the Nokia N70 is one of the best smartphones Nokia have produced. There are relatively few things to complain about, and most things work as advertised or better. Recommended.
Thanks for watching. Show 3 will have the T-Mobile MDA Pro, the Nokia N90 and much more. Don't miss it.